7 things that change when you put God first. Here's something that might be uncomfortable to admit. You can go to church every Sunday. You can know scripture. You can pray before meals, before bed, and in the hard moments. And still, underneath all of it, feel like your life isn't moving the way it should. Like something's off, but you can't quite name it. That quiet frustration, it's more common than you think. Because there's a difference between having God in your life and having God first in your life. And that difference is not small. Change 2. It changes the way you make decisions. It changes who you become under pressure. It changes what you're willing to walk away from and what you're finally able to hold on to. Most people keep God somewhere in the top 5, somewhere near the front, but not quite at it, and so their faith is real, but its power in their daily life stays limited. They believe in a God who moves mountains, but they're still buried under the same worry they had 3 years ago, the same confusion, the same patterns they can't seem to break. If that lands for you, stay with me. Because today, I'm going to walk you through 7 specific, tangible changes that happen when you stop keeping God nearby and start keeping Him first. Not just on Sunday, not just in the crisis moments. First, in the quiet Tuesday morning, in the decision you're about to make, in the relationship you're unsure about, in the version of yourself you're still becoming. These aren't ideas, they're shifts. Real ones, the kind that don't happen overnight, but once they start, you can't unsee them. Let's get into it. Change 1. You stop carrying what was never yours to carry. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how many hours you slept. You know the one. You wake up and you're already behind, already worried about the thing that might go wrong, the person who might let you down, the outcome you can't guarantee. It's the weight of trying to hold everything together at once. And here's the thing about that weight. It doesn't announce itself as fear. It shows up as busyness, as the need to always be planning, always be preparing, always be one step ahead. Because if you stop thinking about it for even a moment, something might slip through. That kind of living is exhausting, and the reason so many people stay in it isn't because they don't trust God, it's because they haven't fully understood what trusting Him actually requires. When you put God first, you're not just adding a spiritual habit to your morning, you're making a fundamental decision about who's actually in charge. You're acknowledging, not just in words but in behavior, that you are not the one holding the universe together. That sounds simple, but the effect of it is profound. When you start your day by placing your concerns before God before you put them on your own shoulders, something changes in how you carry them. They don't disappear, but they're no longer crushing you, because now you're not the last line of defense. You're not the only one working on the problem. The weight shifts. Not all at once, but shift by shift, you start to notice that the version of yourself who used to collapse under certain kinds of pressure is being replaced by someone quieter, someone with less urgency, someone who can sit in uncertainty without coming apart at the seams. That's not numbness, that's trust being built one day at a time. And the more consistently you practice giving things to God before you spiral about them, the more you start to recognize something remarkable. Most of what you've been carrying wasn't yours to carry in the first place. Change 2. Your sense of direction gets sharper. One of the most disorienting feelings in life isn't failure, it's being unsure of what you're even working toward. Moving fast but in no particular direction, doing a lot but feeling like none of it is adding up to anything. A lot of people live their entire lives in that mode, responding to what's in front of them, reacting to urgency, never quite stopping long enough to ask whether the direction they're running in is actually the right one. Here's what happens when you don't have God at the center of your life's compass. You let the loudest things set your direction, and the loudest things are rarely the most important ones. Social media tells you what to want. Your peers tell you what success looks like. Your fears tell you to play it safe. Your pride tells you to prove yourself. And so you end up somewhere, but not necessarily somewhere that means anything to you. When you put God first, your sense of direction doesn't come from the loudest voice in the room. It comes from something quieter, but far more stable. You begin to develop what you can only describe as a compass that works even in the fog, an internal sense of this aligns versus this doesn't, that starts to guide your choices in ways that are hard to explain but impossible to ignore. This doesn't mean you always know exactly what's next. Let's be honest, sometimes walking with God looks like having clarity about the very next step and absolutely no visibility beyond that. But that one step is enough, because you take it and the next one appears. People who don't have God first are often paralyzed waiting for a perfect plan before they move. People who have God first learn to move with purpose even in the middle of the unknown, because their direction isn't tied to certainty, it's tied to something deeper than certainty. You stop asking, "What does everyone else think I should do?" and you start asking, "What is God saying?" And the more you practice hearing that question, the more you begin to trust the answer when it comes. Change 3. Your relationship with failure completely transforms. This one might be the most underrated change on this list. Think about how most people relate to failure. They avoid it, they're ashamed of it, they replay it, they let it become part of how they describe themselves, as someone who tried and couldn't, as someone who should have known better, as someone who just isn't built for more. Failure for most people is a verdict, but when God is first in your life, failure stops being a verdict and starts being a piece of data. It stops being a final word and starts being a part of a longer sentence that isn't finished yet. Here's why that shift happens. When you trust that God is working through your life, not just in the highlight moments, but in the setbacks, in the wrong turns, in the seasons that didn't produce what you hoped, you can't hold failure the same way, because you've already accepted that His plan is bigger than your plan, and your plan failing doesn't mean His plan failed. It might mean you're being redirected. It might mean something needed to fall apart before the right thing could stand up. It might mean the lesson hidden inside the loss is worth the thing you lost. You don't have to understand it immediately. In fact, most of the time you won't, but you hold it differently. Instead of crumbling under what went wrong, you find yourself asking, with genuine curiosity, not bitterness, "What is this making room for?" That question changes your posture, and your posture changes your trajectory. People who put God first don't give up less easily because they're more disciplined. They give up less easily because they genuinely believe the story isn't over. They've seen enough, in their own life, in Scripture, in the testimony of others, that what looks like an ending is frequently a setup. So they get back up, not because they're fearless, but because they're grounded in something that failure can't touch. Change 4. The right people start finding you. Relationships are one of the most powerful forces shaping your life, and most people don't give them nearly enough honest examination. You become like the people closest to you, not slowly, quickly. Their beliefs seep in, their standards become your standards, their ceiling quietly becomes your ceiling. And if you're surrounding yourself with people who aren't going anywhere in the areas that matter, there's a very real chance you're not going anywhere either. When you put God first, your relational world starts to happen something interesting. You don't always choose it consciously, but your values clarify. And when your values clarify, your tolerance for certain dynamics quietly disappears. Conversations that used to feel normal start to feel empty. Time spent in certain company that used to feel comfortable starts to feel like it costs you something. Not because you've become better than anyone, but because you're growing, and growth changes what fits. This can be a lonely season, let's be real about that. There's a real grief that comes with outgrowing connections you used to depend on. You might lose people who were part of your life for years, and that's not painless. But here's what almost always follows. New people begin to appear. People who are living in the direction you're growing toward. People whose presence doesn't drain you, it calls something out of you. People who pray with you, challenge you honestly, and make you want to be better without making you feel like you're not enough. You don't manufacture those connections. You can't force them, but when God is first in your life, you position yourself to receive the relationships that are actually meant for you where you're going, not just where you've been. And those relationships are worth the wait. Change 5. You stop needing approval the way you used to. This one runs deeper than most people realize, because the hunger for approval is one of the most quietly destructive forces in a person's life.
It shapes what you say and what you don't say. It shapes what opportunities you pursue and which ones you quietly dismiss because you're not sure others will understand. It keeps you performing a version of yourself that's designed to be acceptable, rather than becoming the version of yourself that's actually true. And the brutal irony of this is the more you need approval, the less you actually get it. Because people can sense when someone needs validation from them, and it's not attractive. It doesn't invite respect, it invites management. When you put God first, something starts to shift in the foundation of your identity, slowly but unmistakably. You start to understand, not just intellectually, but in the way you feel it, that your worth was settled before anyone in your life had the chance to weigh in on it, that you are not a project awaiting the world's approval, that you were made with intention by someone whose opinion of you doesn't fluctuate with your performance, or your failures, or how impressive your life looks from the outside. That understanding starts
to loosen the grip that other people's opinions have on your choices. You don't stop caring about people. You actually become a more generous and genuine version of yourself because you're no longer relating to people from a place of need. You're relating to them from a place of fullness. You start taking risks you would have talked yourself out of before because the thing that used to stop you, what will people think, no longer carries the same authority. God's opinion becomes the loudest one. And since you can't lose that approval by being authentically yourself, the pressure begins to lift in a way that's almost physical. People around you notice. They often can't name what's different, but there's a settled quality to someone who doesn't need the room to validate them, and it's one of the most compelling things a person can become. Change 6. Your hardest seasons start to make a different kind of sense. Nobody signs up for pain, but everybody experiences it. And what separates people who come out of hard seasons stronger from people who come out of them broken usually isn't the severity of what they went through. It's the framework they held it in. Without God at the center, pain has no frame. It's just damage. Things go wrong, you absorb the impact, and you carry the wound forward. Maybe you build walls. Maybe you shrink. Maybe you grow bitter in ways so gradual you don't even notice until one day you realized you stopped trusting people, stopped hoping, stopped expecting good things. That's what unframed pain does over time. When you put God first, your hardest seasons get a frame, not one that makes them hurt less. Don't let anyone tell you faith is an anesthetic because it's not, but one that gives the hurt a purpose, a container, a reason to be survived rather than just endured. You start to notice something almost strange. The very trials you were begging God to remove become the ones you're most grateful you walked through, because you come out of them knowing things about yourself that comfort could never have taught you. Your capacity expands, your empathy deepens, your faith goes from something you inherited to something you own, because you tested it and it held. There's a particular kind of strength that only gets built under pressure. You can't manufacture it in comfortable seasons. It has to be forged. And when God is first in your life, you begin to see the hard seasons not as evidence that something is wrong, but as evidence that something is being made. That perspective doesn't come quickly. Some seasons are long and genuinely brutal, and you will not always feel this way while you're in them. But you start to collect enough evidence, enough times that God came through, enough times that what looked like the worst thing turned into the most important thing, that your ability to hold hard seasons without falling apart quietly grows. You stop asking, why me? Not because you've given up, but because you've started asking something better. What is this building in me? Change 7. Your future self becomes someone you're actually moving toward. Here's the quiet tragedy of a life without clear direction or foundation. Most people have a version of themselves they hope to become, healthier, freer, more at peace, more purposeful, in relationships that feel real. They can picture it, they want it, but there's a gap between who they are now and who they want to be, and instead of narrowing, that gap tends to stay the same or quietly widen. Not because they're lazy, not because they don't try, but because growth without grounding is unsustainable. You can hustle hard enough to look like you're changing without actually being transformed at the level where it counts. When you put God first, something different starts to happen.
The gap between who you are and who you're becoming starts to actually close, not because you're trying harder, but because the foundation is solid enough to build on. You stop making the same decisions that lead to the same outcomes because your decision-making is no longer being driven by the same old fears and impulses. You stop tolerating the same patterns in your relationships because your understanding of your own worth has shifted. You stop abandoning your commitments when they get hard because your discipline is being fed by something that doesn't run out. And day by day, without always being able to see it clearly, you're becoming someone different. Here's what's remarkable about that process. When you look back, 6 months later, a year later, 3 years later, you often can't identify the single moment things changed, because it wasn't a single moment. It was 1,000 small decisions to put God first, stacked on top of each other that quietly rewrote who you are. The future self you've been picturing stops feeling like someone you're always about to become. They start feeling like someone you're actually being. Present tense, right now. And the version of your future that felt just out of reach starts to look more and more like the path you're already on. 7 changes. Let's bring them back together. When you put God first, you stop carrying what was never yours to carry, and the weight you've been lugging around starts to lift. Your sense of direction sharpens, and you begin moving with purpose instead of just speed. Your relationship with failure transforms, and what used to level you now teaches you. The people in your life begin to shift, the draining connections lose their grip, and the right ones start to find you. The need for approval that's been quietly running your decisions begins to loosen, and a settled confidence starts to take its place. Your hardest seasons stop being just painful and start being purposeful, forged into the kind of strength that nothing comfortable could have built. And the future version of yourself, the one you've been hoping to become, stops being a distant destination and starts being your actual direction. None of this happens because your life becomes easy. It happens because your foundation becomes unshakable. And when the foundation is right, everything built on top of it can finally stand. If this hits something in you today, don't let it pass without responding to it. The smallest step towards putting God first, taken today, right now, in whatever your Tuesday or your Thursday actually looks like, counts. It all counts. Matthew 6:33. Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. You are not behind. You are not too far gone. You are not the exception to what God can do in a surrendered life. You're just deciding.